This segment is on night photography, which can be much more exciting and rewarding than during the day. For example, when I was in Italy, photographing the Roman Forum, it was really difficult for me to figure out how to make something visually exciting, since it was concrete and rubble. But when I photographed it at night, it made all the difference in the world. Photographing a building at night really only has a couple of differences than during the day. The most obvious may be shooting on a tripod. You'll want to be on a tripod since we will need to shoot with slower shutter speeds. Without a tripod, you will be at risk for camera shake, where you cannot physically hold the camera still. Since buildings aren't moving, slower shutter speeds enable us to get light without having to raise our ISO. Another difference will be using a remote shutter release. With slower shutter speeds, you will cause camera shake even when on a tripod by simply touching the shutter. A remote release will keep us from having to touch the camera to expose our image. If you don't have a remote release, you can set your camera's timer. You'll have to wait a bit in between exposures, but it can be helpful if you don't have a remote release on hand. Another thing to be mindful of when shooting on a tripod is to turn off your image stabilization. Image stabilization, IS on Canon or VR on a Nikon, is a great feature that has been added to many lenses. It's basically a gyroscope that helps prevent camera shake when hand-holding your camera. It looks for vibrations in order to reduce that camera shake. However, when no vibrations are to be found, the movement of the stabilizer actually causes camera shake. Other brands, such as Sony, actually have the image stabilization built into the camera, not on the lens. But on Nikon and Canon lenses, you'll see an on-off switch directly on the lens. So you'll want to turn off your image stabilization whenever you're on a tripod. Just don't forget to turn it back on when you aren't on the tripod. The last step is going to be getting our exposure. So let's look at camera settings. First, we'll set our ISO to 100 or 200 if you don't have 100. Since we're going to be on a tripod and we can adjust our shutter speed for light, we don't need to push our ISO any higher because we'll end up getting more grain than we need. The next step is to set our aperture, and really, aperture can be anywhere from f8 to f11 for a deep depth of field. Since we're shooting wide angle, a range of f8 to f11 will get us a good deep depth of field. However, shooting at f16 or even f22 will give you a starburst effect to the specular highlights like you see here. Setting our shutter speed. We're going to set our shutter speed according to our light meter indicator to get our exposure. During the evening, your light meter indicator may not yield the results you were looking for, but this part is simple. You can adjust your exposure to your liking as it gets darker. You'll see on the left here, your indicator is showing an underexposed too dark image, where the indicator is showing a too bright or overexposed image on the right side. By adjusting our shutter speed until we see the light meter indicator get to the 0 mark, that's when the camera thinks that it's a good exposure. At night, it may not be the best result, but it'll definitely give you your starting place. A great shortcut is rotating your shutter speed dial to the left, and it will give you more light. So the opposite, when you want less light, rotate it to the right to make it darker. Depending on your location and how long your shutter speed is, you may start to see things moving literally disappear. This is one of the cool things about night photography. If you want to get tourists out of your image, like this shot, then using a longer exposure can help you get rid of them. Here at a 2-second exposure, you can see the tourists still hanging around the Colosseum. As I adjust my shutter speed even slower to a 6-second exposure, you see that the tourists are literally gone. As long as they're moving, they'll disappear. Here's another image at a 2.5-second exposure, and the cars disappear. However, the trail of light from their headlights and taillights are showing. That can be a fun thing to show movement in your image.